Welcome to the Startup Grind.
So first of all, what I want to know is how or why or where the psychology, your master's in psychology, not just a BA, but like master's in psychology, what were you going to do with that?
I was going to become a psychologist. I had a very strong interest in how the human mind worked. And I think it was my freshman year in college, I took just kind of your basic standard Psych 101 class, and I got really interested in the psychology of personality, the psychology of culture, the psychology of emotion, and then spent a significant portion of the following years in the lab, running experiments with human subjects and learning a ton about cognitive psychology and the psychology of perception. I think one of my favorite experiences was training in a system that they call facial action coding system.
Yes.
Someone's heard of it, yes. They're a fan of Paul Ekman, a couple of Paul Ekman fans here. Effectively, it's training that involves a deep study in the minute contraction and relaxation of small muscles in the face, and how that may or may not correspond with the experience of a particular emotion or cognitive state. And there's a great television show called Lie to Me. Yeah, I see some nodding. It's actually a really fun way to get exposure to the applied use of facts, and it was a really neat way to learn how people communicate, and useful, interestingly enough. Yeah.
And when did the change from wanting to be a psychiatrist, psychologist of some kind to being, you dabbled in that, you're into the Accenture and T-Street, what kind of turned the corner to be in the business world? Was there a thing, or was there many things?
Yeah, I wish I could say that there was some thread, some deliberate progression. For me, I think what it boiled down to was my senior year. I was in the midst of senior year activities and studying and working, full time, and then I had, not full time, it felt like full time on top of classes, plus time in the lab, and I got really burnt out with the research, and I was doing a master's degree my senior year too, and it was too much. And so the last company that was recruiting on campus was a company called Accenture, and they said, well, we don't really care what you learned. We'll bring you into the fold and teach you what you need to know to be what ended up being a product manager for hire. So I went in and out of all of these different companies in these sort of classic staff augmentation style roles. Someone goes on maternity leave and you jump in for 3 months, or the company doesn't want to invest in an FTE for a particular project, so you jump in, and I would go in and out of companies and just launch products, and my clients would be my peers and bosses and reports, which was sort of a unique experience at that age, and certainly learned a lot, but more than anything, got really excited about tech.
And that was your thing? It was like...
Yeah, a few years, yeah.
And then, so T-Street got you into the startup world, working with, that was
Dave Chappelle, the second most famous Dave Chappelle.
Yes. And so then sooner or later, after a couple states,
Amazon on the Kindle team, yeah.
So tell us just like how you got to Madrona, and then we'll jump into some stuff.
So in Kindle, I gave something on the order of, I think it was over 2 months notice. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I gave them a ton of notice so that I could transition the projects and the sort of hats that I was wearing over to the right people. It took time. Kindle was growing so fast, they couldn't hire quickly enough. I think that's still the case, actually. And so during that 2-month period, I just interviewed at startups all over the country. I was looking predominantly at director of marketing, director of product roles, and kind of wanted to delve more deeply into those areas in a sort of a consumer-focused startup. And I went all over and kind of collected a set of offers that I was excited about but was debating between. And I knew the guys at Madrona because not only of my experience at Teach Street, but because I had reached out to them cold in business school, I think, to serve on some panel that I was organizing. So I figured, if anyone has their ear to the ground and could give me the scoop on these startups, it would be these guys. And the conversation around actually joining Madrona and staying in my hometown of Seattle actually sort of spun out from there.
Very cool. Very cool. And so you've been there 3 years.
3 years, yeah.
And I'm not going to say what you learned in 3 years, because obviously you learned a lot, but what was the thing you learned that was the most surprising, that you're like, wow, I didn't think I need to know this thing? What is there something that it wasn't like just something you would know, oh yeah, you have to read financial statements or whatever, but what was the thing that was a big surprise to you?
Well, I think what surprised me the most is that to a large extent, I still feel like a student of psychology. With these early, not in that sense, not clinical psychology, but to a large extent, in these very early stages, the success of a company comes down, one, to the people that you have at the table, and then two, how they interact, how they work together, how they complement each other, how they don't complement each other. And there's a great book that was written by a former professor of mine in business school. The book's called Founders' Dilemmas. Some nodding heads again, written by Noam Wasserman. And for 9 years, he spent countless hours with hundreds of founders, founding teams, successful teams, not as successful teams. And at the end of each of these experiences that these founding teams had, if the team had been successful, he'd say, well, why do you think you were successful? And for the teams that weren't, he'd ask the same question. And what he found was that something on the order of 2/3 of the time, those founders would point to team-related issues, whether it wasn't shared vision, whether it was a disagreement around a go-to-market strategy, or even whether we didn't split the equity in a way that allowed for the right incentives to play out. It's so human. It's human, I think, when you're a late-stage company too, it's all people, but in those early stages, it's so
critical.
Absolutely, yeah.
So obviously you get to use your background for that, but what is so give us a couple clues on what you look for when you're talking to founders, early stage people, because in fact, why don't we take a step back, kind of describe what you focus on at Madrona, so you're early stage, so kind of tell the audience what your thing is at Madrona.
Yeah, well, I think each of us at Madrona has a lot of areas, a lot of investment themes that we're super interested in. A lot of that has to do with the fact that we are a firm that is largely geography focused. So I think last time I checked, this might be out of date, but it was something like 80 to 85% of our investments are here in the Northwest. Most of that's Seattle, but there's a couple in Vancouver, a couple in Portland. And yeah, we've got a handful in the Valley and even one or two back east, but largely investing in early stage tech Pacific Northwest companies is the sweet spot. Yeah. And by early stage, I mean usually it's sort of seed or Series A where we make our initial investment. Sometimes later, that's usually the exception rather than the norm. For me, it's sort of reflects, I guess the areas that I cover reflect sort of a sense of opportunism that it has to be top of mind when you're going after companies in a particular geography. consumer, mobile, B2B2C, if that makes sense. I've been spending a lot of time in ed tech and health tech, or healthcare technology. You know, it's one of the neat things about this job is you get to try so many different categories and products and industries on for size. And one of the challenges is trying to get really smart really quickly if it's an area that you don't necessarily have personal experience in. Because you're talking to somebody across the table, you know, a founder.
Really smart.
Who's not only really, really smart, but has been spending the past several months living and breathing and crying over the same set of challenges in a particular market. So you better understand what they're facing pretty well in order to, one, have a hope at having an intelligent conversation with them, but two, really being a strong potential thought partner as you pursue a potential investment.
Speaking of partners, you said in the other interviews and things that you want to meet them. You want to meet the person who's going to start the next billion-dollar company out of the Northwest.
That is correct.
Yes.
Yeah. I think a lot of my partners feel that way too in Madrona.
So, do you think you've met any of those yet?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I absolutely think I do. Yeah, I won't mention any names for fear of accidentally alienating somebody publicly, but absolutely. Yeah, I think in fact, you know, over the course of the next few years, you'll see a number of companies emerging from the Northwest and from Seattle specifically that will live up to the vision that the founders and of course investors have for that company, and both in and outside of the Madrona portfolio.
Yeah. And do you prefer to work, you personally, Julie personally, do you prefer to work with early stage, and that's like, you know, on the cusp of even maybe pre-seed, or do you like to work with them maybe a little further along? Where does Julie get the excitement?
It's not to give a great answer. It's really hard to choose because there's different forms of excitement to be gleaned, just totally selfishly, going back to the whole personal question, at different stages. So if you invest in the later stage and you see how quickly a company that's really figured it out can get momentum and make an impact and shape the lives, either personally or professionally, of the customers it reaches. I mean, that's addictive. It's exciting. So I really enjoy that. In the early stages, you know, there's so many questions to answer, and everything is just very tabula rasa. No one really knows where things are going to go, and there's a ton of opportunity to really screw that up. But there's a ton of opportunity just to get it right, and by being both thoughtful as well as, you know, able to make decisions in real time as you learn information and get new data points. That's pretty fun in its own right too. So.
Yeah. And what does Madrona look for in a team? You know, I've interviewed Greg and talked to Jason. I mean, talked to the guys over there. What do you guys look for in a team? You know, this audience, I will guarantee there are people.
Yeah, how many of you are entrepreneurs or founders here? Oh my gosh, that is awesome. That's so cool.
So there's people here that are in the process, and maybe not raising money today, but know they will be soon. What one or two things would you tell them to say, here are things that we look for in a founding team? Give us a couple hints. Or
yeah, I might do more than a couple, because there's a few things I think. Yeah. So in founders and founding teams, I don't know, there's a sense of resilience that I think is really critical, especially early on. Someone who comes across at minimum in conversation as someone who's going to be able to weather a ton of ups and downs. Someone who really sticks to it and is persistent and has so much conviction in what it is that they're doing that you believe that they can really, you know, manage that roller coaster even at the low points. Two, really strong communication skills. Sales is, I think, one of the most underrated and under-taught skills. particularly in the United States, and that's another comment on our education system, but verbal communication, being able to influence people, certainly customers, but also investors and employees, convincing people that you have the vision that's going to win, that you are a company that is going to achieve something very meaningful, and then reconvincing them of that every single day that they come to work with you and to work for you so that they can ride the ups and downs with you. Communication and sales, really, really important. 3, customer focus. Yeah. Relentless customer focus. Somebody who, before they do anything, finds a way to reach out to customers, to talk to his or her customers, and understand what problem is being solved, what opportunity is being best addressed by what it is that they're building. And that comes across, by the way, in these early conversations to your advantage. 4, I'd say someone who's really analytical. At Madrona, we tend to be a more analytical firm. We really love investing in smart, hardcore, data-driven entrepreneurs. Every VC has their own style in that regard, but someone who really looks at the numbers, who really is strategic about how they go after a particular opportunity. Love that. And I think the last thing I would say, which doesn't often get mentioned, but it's really important. It kind of comes down once again to that interpersonal human factor. So if you think about the average lifespan of a company in the portfolio of a venture capital firm, there's going to be a broad range in terms of the amount of time that startup, that company spends under the umbrella of that portfolio. Sometimes the company will sell quickly, sometimes it'll take years and years and years. On average, I think roughly we see that it's about 5 to 7 years or so that a company will stay in our portfolio, which is a really long time. In fact, that is longer than most US marriages these days. So you really want to like the person. You really want this to be someone that you trust. You want this to be somebody that you believe has a ton of integrity. Someone that's going to tell you the bad news early. They're going to want to tell you the bad news early because they trust you too. And in that vein, I think a really important exercise that each of you should be going through when you raise capital is diligence on the investor. Because it's the same boat that you're going to be in too. So when you meet with an investor, as they're on both sides, it is completely a two-sided thing. So as you're having these conversations, even early on, talk to other CEOs who work with those investors. Ask the hard questions. Really figure out, is this somebody that I'm going to want around my table in those really hard, tough moments? And by the same token, is this somebody that I'm going to be wanting to celebrate? I'm going to be wanting to celebrate the good moments with too. So it's really key.
It's a marriage. I mean, partnerships are tough. There's co-founders. Yeah, it's a tough relationship. Just like marriage stuff. It's the same. Just like that. Same concept. What do you think people that come to you are lacking the most?
What are the people that I meet with and lacking the most?
Money. Besides money. Besides money. You said that. That was great. Besides money, what is it? Because we know they're missing money, or so we can talk about. But yeah, what do you think is the entrepreneurs are lacking the most? Maybe there's.
I think sometimes it's the answer to the question, at least commonly that I see, is they don't ask the question, do I want venture capital? I come from, I think a community of peers and friends and colleagues who are starting companies and really excited about building the next big thing. And one of the things that I had always heard before I did this job was, oh man, did you raise any VC funding? Did you? who's your investor? Yeah, exactly. And it's always, I think, this top of mind, go-to thought, I'm going to raise venture capital. And the fact is, most companies, venture is not the best form of funding. And there's any number of reasons why that might not be the case. One, did you raise venture?
Angel, all angel.
Yeah, and were you deliberate about that?
Yeah, there's no way we're going to go into that world.
And why? Why not?
Well, because we didn't want to deal with the pressures that they would force us to be speedy or, once money's from a venture capital, at least from my standpoint 7-8 years ago, was we have to put the pedal to the metal, and we weren't so sure we wanted to do that, and at least working with.
Yeah, there's some expectation that you are going to grow.
Yeah.
That's certainly there.
Yeah.
There's all, I think if you, if you look at a venture term sheet versus an angel term sheet, you'll notice there's a huge difference in the control and the economic provisions. Venture funds are large. There's, our most recent fund, which we started investing out of, I think, in the winter of 2012, it's a $300 million fund. We're not going to be making, hundreds of investments out of that fund. We're going to be making, very deliberate, slow choices. Not slow necessarily in the diligence process, but we're very careful about who we invest in because there's a huge opportunity cost to time, and there's a huge opportunity cost in that fund to invest in companies that do not really move the needle or have the potential to move the needle on that fund. So the size of a market opportunity for a venture investment has to be significantly larger than you'd find for any other style of company that wants to raise capital. I mean, we're not going to be interested if a company has a market opportunity of $500 million. That's a really big market opportunity to go after, but even that is not as compelling to VCs.
Yeah.
If you're building a business that you want to complement your life, or like a lifestyle business as they call it, it doesn't make sense to raise venture capital. And I meet with a lot of companies that when you start to ask those questions, they don't necessarily know what they want going in. So it's not, raising venture is not a check mark on your path. If it's the right fit for you, and you really do your own diligence on that, it can be hugely additive. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think the numbers speak to that.
Yeah.
But there are trade-offs to it, so it's really important to educate yourself and your team on what exactly you're getting when you take that style of investment.
Yeah, and there's in the Seattle area, there's plenty of places where you can get education about whether it's VC or revenue finance. There's all these choices now, like angel financing, revenue financing, debt financing. I mean, there's many choices now. It's just not VC.
Yeah, and there's a really rich trove of VC blogs out there that are very popular for good reason. There's a real set of how-tos.
So name a couple that you follow. What are a couple that you like?
Yeah, outside of Madrona, there's some amazing blogs that my colleagues at Madrona put together. But for me, I read. There's a great one called "Both Sides of the Table." A lot of nods here, written by Mark Sister, who's an LA-based venture capitalist who writes, I think, fantastically about a number of different topics. Brad Feld has an amazing blog.
Yeah.
Fred Wilson, a lot of really smart tactics for not only fundraising, but even down to the nitty-gritty and contracts. Really useful set right there.
Yeah. Angel List is also great to just to get information from.
Yeah.
What have you learned about investing in startups other than it's hard to pick winners? Yeah, so like the actual, writing a check, because you came, not from that world, right? So what have you learned, like about investing that you just like, wow, you know, I would have never known this.
You know, I think going in, I thought, well, I think by the time I joined, I knew this, but venture capital more broadly, I thought, oh wow, you're working in finance. And it's not working in finance at all. No, you're working in it's tech and business and people, and it's the numbers of it, you know, from a deal perspective are certainly important. I mean, these drive the core economics for your fund. We are a financial services entity. You know, we've got investors and wonderful investors, both.
But the deal points, how important really are? I mean, if you're looking at the deal, like whether you get a $3 million valuation or $2.5 million valuation, at the end of the day, does it really matter to Madrona?
At the end of the day, yes, I think the economics totally matter, and they matter both for the entrepreneur and for the investor. But in terms of the actual deal points, there's only really a few terms in a deal that actually really matter all that much. And there's going to be a lot of stuff as you negotiate, you know, these terms with investors, large and small, that you might, you know, spend time on. But the fact of the matter is, there's only really a few that really matter or should matter to you,
Yeah.
and the rest, you know, hopefully the lawyers can take care of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, just don't give up too much to the company. Well, let's talk about things that I know you're passionate about. Women in technology. We've talked about it here on the stage a couple different times.
I see a lot of women here today, by the way. That's fantastic, yeah.
We do a pretty good job here at Startup Grind. We try. So tell us some things that you think that Seattle's done well, maybe others haven't, or Seattle's done poorly that other cities haven't done, to bring more women involved in technology. I was talking to Haley, who's part of CIP. She's a huge fan of women in technology. Earlier this evening. What are some things that you think are really helping or not helping?
Well, I think there's the logistical things, and then I think there's the more underlying cultural things that you see going on here. One of the things that's great about Seattle is there's totally this rising tide lifts all boats ethos here, where you find time and time again that founders, regardless of background, regardless of experience, etc., they really do want to support each other. It's amazing to see. It's wonderful to see. You do not see that in every startup community. In fact, in most you don't. But you know, I see founders here who are even, you know, arguably, at least tangentially competitive to each other, that meet and use each other as sounding boards. And you know, certainly they're still aggressive and they're smart about how they do that, but there's very much this mentality here that founders want other companies to be successful. And it's very smart to be that way too.
Yeah.
The more volume of successful companies that you see here, the more talent that's drawn up.
Yeah, success breeds success.
Absolutely. And I think that serves founders of all backgrounds really well. Certainly women, I think, is just one category that benefits from that I don't think you'd see in as many other communities. So that's sort of the underlying, the systemic things that I think Seattle does well by its very nature.
Yeah.
From a tactical perspective, there's a lot of interesting avenues for women to connect in this community. I think Startup Weekend, which is based here, I think a lot of people around the world don't know that. They've got a tremendous set of initiatives right now focused on early stage entrepreneurial women, helping them connect with resources and with each other and with entrepreneurs of all backgrounds in this community to become smarter on how they start companies. Startup Seattle has had a number of great initiatives. At Madrona, we've done a number of initiatives. Women in Tech as a group here, and there's a number of awesome meetup groups here that I've attended events for. In fact, on Thursday night, there's a Women 2.0 event.
Sure.
You know, there's the logistics of this as well, but one thing that I've noticed in talking to a lot of other women in technology, and particularly women entrepreneurs, is they'll say, yeah, it's interesting. I can probably count the number of other women entrepreneurs that I know here on this one hand.
Yeah.
And there's a ton that are here, but a lot of them just aren't quite on the radar yet, or they're not out there, or there isn't necessarily the discovery mechanism yet for finding other people who perhaps you might identify with more by virtue of sharing, the same set of chromosomes, whatever you want to use as the dimension there. But I think that being able to forge those connections is really critical between men, between women, and all types of backgrounds. And there's a group that we started from Madrona called the Seattle, which is very much focused on that exact opportunity and that exact challenge in Seattle. Right now we do a number of sort of small group coffees, but we try to do an annual event. I think we'll probably have one either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year that brings together specifically early stage founders, startuppers, and wantrepreneurs, women wantrepreneurs, so that they can all meet and get to know one another and hopefully find ways to perceive the path to entrepreneurship as a little bit more well-trod.
Yeah, well, even Google's doing some things as well.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's trying. What do you think is the most interesting industry looking ahead, say look ahead, 12, 18 months? To you, to Julie, what's interesting, maybe what's interesting to Madrona? So let's start with Julie. What do you think is interesting out there in the industries, whatever, what do you think? What are things you're tracking?
Yeah, I guess one theme that I've been tracking is healthcare IT, which has been, for us, from a track record perspective, relatively exotic. I think we've only had maybe one or two investments at most in our history that have fallen into that realm. One is a company called Gentronics, which we can talk about in a little bit. But I think healthcare is being completely redefined right now. Certainly there's been...
Rightfully so.
Yes, it's about time, yeah. I mean, there's sort of the macro regulatory forces that are certainly changing, but the way that patients understand their health, the way that doctors are tracking a patient's health, the way that monitoring, prevention, and treatment is being undertaken, that's changing really rapidly. There was some controversy. I remember reading about this 6 months ago, but there was a VC in the Valley, and I'm not sure who it was, so I won't take a guess, but he went down to the Stanford Medical School, and in front of a room of hundreds of medical students, these aspiring physicians,
sure.
Made some comment along the lines of, in 20, 25 years or something to that effect, all of you who are not, in some sort of specialty, sort of the primary care physicians, you are going to be completely disintermediated. You're not going to have jobs, effectively, because you're going to be replaced by data. Data about your patient, data from the patient's DNA. The cost of sequencing a genome is descending faster than Moore's law would dictate. It's crazy. A few years from now, it's going to be nil.
Yeah.
And that is just a mine of fascinating data about things you should be doing to prevent disease, pharmacogenomic risk. It's unbelievable. What can be understood from a blood sample. That is changing by the minute. And the way that you make a diagnosis and prescribe a treatment, largely that's driven by experience and intuition these days. But guess what?
It's going to be data.
Machine learning, data. It's amazing. I think it's going to be a really critical and world-changing theme, both in the short term and certainly over the coming decade.
What other thing in more of maybe a bigger, broader stroke for Madrona are you guys looking at? Maybe that's interesting that several of you have talked about. It's like, hey, we're looking at this, looking at that.
Yeah, I think on this topic of data, I think that's companies that kind of fit into this notion of dataware, that utilize infrastructure and utilize the infrastructure, say a database, for instance, and from that set of data extract meaningful insights that can be used to any number of different applications. I think that's a theme that a number of our portfolio companies have certainly fit into in research.
Make decisions from existing data that's already.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I would think so.
If you could pick one thing that is hard for young entrepreneurs to learn, what would that one thing be? So think about some of the founders you've worked with, entrepreneurs you've worked with, and they may be lacking a skill or two, but there's a thing that they should know better, especially being funded by venture capitalists. What is that? Is there something that they can maybe be better at? Is there something that they're deficient at?
Well, young entrepreneurs, I'd say, are often the strongest because they aren't as jaded by particular markets and competitive landscapes that others are. So I think, if anything, naivete almost can be a huge advantage because you see opportunity, you see possibility, and being
as you get older.
Yeah, as you get older, you start. Yeah, you see whether they're closed or not. You see the doors being more closed, or oh, someone's tried that'll never work. And as you get more experience, it's harder to think outside of the paradigm that you've been operating in. So young entrepreneurs, I think, are just so phenomenal to work with. And I'd start by answering the question that way. I think another mistake that entrepreneurs make is just not talking to enough people. I think really early on when you have an idea,
talk to enough customers.
Talking to customers, but talking to smart people you respect, whose opinion you respect, who can give you critical feedback. In those early days, when you're ideating and you're kind of refining, what am I going after? What's the right opportunity? How do I think about pursuing this from either a business model or a go-to-market perspective? Really talking to people who have been there is extremely important. It's kind of on the other, how do you deal with the naivete? How do you deal with the wide-eyedness? You talk to people who have been there. And you don't necessarily adopt their feedback or their criticism 100%. You take out what's going to be relevant and meaningful to you, and you let that make your perspective and your pitch sharper. And having a ton of conversations, having a ton of cups of coffee with people that you think can provide valuable insight, whether they have experience in your industry or not, is something that people forget to do very early on as they're thinking, okay, well what is this idea? What should the business plan, quote unquote, be?
Yeah. What makes Madrona different than other VCs?
Well, there's a couple of answers to that.
Who's the short one?
Yeah. I would say that I have friends from business school all over the country who are doing roles very similar to mine. And I'll ask them about, what's it like to work at that firm? What's the culture of the company like? How do you guys work with your portfolio companies? And sort of some of the more sort of high-level qualitative questions. And more often than not, you hear some tough things. Hey, it's really competitive here. It's cutthroat. Here's why I'm less happy. And one thing I would say about Madrona is, from day one, I have been, without exception on this team, and I say this truly with every bit of conviction that I can muster for this. These are not only some of the most sharp, smart, creative, analytical, and aggressive people in a really good way. They go after what's right. They go after what's right for the firm. They go after what's right for the entrepreneur. But on top of that, these are some of the most good people I've met. I mean, everyone's extremely warm, and they've been that way, you know. You always have blinders on to your own experience. To me, from day one, just a really warm, respectful, welcoming, positive culture. And as an entrepreneur, when you go into a partner meeting, which is kind of that getting toward the final stages of a process that you're undertaking with a VC, you walk into that partner meeting, you're going to be surrounded by, you know, a dozen people or so who have their own dynamic. And you know, when I talk with entrepreneurs that I know well, they'll say, yeah, you know, you walk into a room and you can tell right away what it's going to be like to work with that firm, because
Feel the energy.
you can feel the energy, you can feel the collaboration, you can feel that everyone's aligned and incented by the same things. For me, I have just as much incentive in every possible way to work with an entrepreneur who I'm not necessarily on, you know, the deal team, quote unquote, for.
Sure.
We're all wanting to support everybody equally. We're all wanting to support each other. We want success for the collective, and we want a really positive culture, because the entrepreneurs, the management teams that we invest in feel that every step of the way. And it's so, so critical, and something that makes this team one that I'm like insanely proud to be a part of.
Yeah. I mean, you feel it when you walk in the room, right?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think sold me on Madrona when I first joined, is without exception, every entrepreneur that I spoke with said that. And I think it's lived and breathed by that team.
If there was another VC, if you were, let's just say you were, let's just say you were let go tomorrow. Let's just say you were let go tomorrow. Where would you apply in the VC business in Seattle?
Well, there's two choices, maybe three. So I'm going to pass on that one, because I feel like answering it would be not very tactful.
Come on. Where did
Thank you. Yeah.
the U.S. No, that's too easy. Is there such a thing as work-life balance in startup?
I think it's extremely important in a startup. I think there's undeniably less of it in a startup. You are working hours like you have never worked before if you haven't worked in a startup before. But it's critical. Team members will say, gosh, you know, I don't really want to take a vacation because I can't imagine what will happen during the week that I'm gone. How am I going to, you know, partially unplug?
Sure.
How am I going to take a step away? And it's really important to do that for a lot of reasons. One, you know, it's important to set an example for your team, because trust me, you want your team members, you want people working for you and with you. You need them to take a break, because that's going to make them more effective. And so if you're not doing that, there's going to be consciously and unconsciously a pressure for your employees to follow suit, which you don't want.
Okay.
Secondly, for your own sanity, for the exact same reason.
Sanity, man.
No, I think it's critical, and I think for me, whenever I talk with entrepreneurs who I know are just nose to the grindstone, and I can see them emailing at 3:30 in the morning, saying, okay, well, you know, what do you have coming up that allows you to take some time to just get a refresh moment?
Yeah.
So important.
Do you spend a lot of time researching? Personally, do you spend a lot of time researching?
Researching different opportunities?
Yeah, like companies, and or like, let's say you saw a company, like, hey, I heard about this company XYZ, you don't know anything about it, so do you spend any time doing that?
Yeah, I think, and the word research, I think means a lot of different things when you're doing sort of what they call, you know, a classic due diligence process. Certainly there's a lot of research on a market opportunity that you just have to. But some of the most critical diligence and research that we do is not, you know, going onto some database or Googling something. It's having a lot of conversations with people who are way smarter than you in a particular market, in a particular set of opportunities. For us, the single most important kind of diligence that we do is meetings and phone calls and reaching out to the smartest people we can possibly think of on a particular deal, on a particular opportunity. So yeah, diligence and research is very, especially in the early stages, a very dynamic process. No one is sitting in a back room creating discounted cash flows based on the market opportunity to assess, assign some type of valuation to the company. That's not really how it works. You have to be much more driven by, especially in the early stages, by what you learn from the people you talk to, who can not only give you background, but can also be critical of the opportunity as you present it to them.
Yeah. Let's go back to that question. If you were fired tomorrow, what would you want to do?
Well, when I was a kid and I got asked that question, no one asked me like that. Yeah, but they say, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure, yeah.
I'd say, well, I want to teach. I love to teach. And one of the great things about this job is we are so tied to the University of Washington. I'd say over a dozen or so of the companies that we've invested in at Madrona, are I think largely IP spun out of the University of Washington and then turned into a commercial endeavor. And right now, I, along with a couple of colleagues of mine, I'm on adjunct faculty at the UW, and we get to teach. And I think if I weren't doing this, that would be something I'd want to continue doing. But to tell you the truth, I think when I first joined Madrona, one of the things that was most exciting to me was the opportunity to get inspired by entrepreneurs and potentially join an early stage startup or even start one.
Yeah.
I'm so happy right now and so just loving this right now that it's not top of mind at all, but if I had to take a stab at answering that question, that's probably where I go.
Good. What do you think the difference between raising money here and raising money in the Valley is?
Um,
And I'm in preface with both Angel and VC. What do you think the difference is between the two cities, two areas?
Yeah, well, there's two questions. So I think the answer for Angel and VC might be slightly different. So in Seattle, I'll start with Angel. There is not a robust network of angel investors in Seattle. There are some amazing groups, and those of you that are looking to raise angel funding, Alliance of Angels, Puget Sound, Venture Club, Seraph, Karetsu Forum, Zeno Society, a lot of really great angel funds, like Founders Co-op. I think Seattle Angel Conference, by the way, also has one as well. Founders Co-op is an amazing angel group. There's a lot of very smart, very talented, very hands-on, great partnership-oriented time. Yeah.
Questions? So feel free to go ahead.
So what are the analytical metrics and ratios that you really look at when you analyze a company?
The question
What are the analytical questions, or what are the analytics and metrics that you watch when you're investing, looking at when you're investing?
Well, I'll give you the answer is, it depends on the business. Hugely depends on the business. But there's certain things that are obvious and maybe less obvious if you haven't been thinking about this on a day-to-day basis. So one, I think customer reaction and any type of quantifiable reaction from your customer, that this is something that is wanted, that they are clamoring for, they are coming back for again and again. I think key metrics that speak to that should be pretty intuitive. One of the kinds of metrics that early stage entrepreneurs and the kinds of customers you're actually bringing, if you're a consumer company, are you collecting an email address? Do they get some kind of free version of a product? Do they get a paid version of a product? Understanding that funnel and what you're paying for each customer along each rung of that funnel, so imperative. Build for that from the get-go. And with that, the other question that VCs are trying to answer is, okay, well, if you're paying X dollars to acquire one customer, how much value? How much value are you extracting from that customer? Whether it's value in the first 12 months, the first 2 years, whether it's value in a lifetime. That metric is classically called LTV, lifetime value, or some people use lifetime revenue, but I think lifetime value is preferred because it considers the gross margins that are going to be driving your business both in the short and midterm. So understanding how quickly you achieve payback on that acquisition, whether it's a few months, whether it's 9 months, whether it's a year, that kind of stuff matters a lot. So building for that from the get-go, being able to report on that is really useful. For SaaS companies, there's also, depending on what business you're building, there's a set of metrics that are gonna matter and be key drivers, but it really just totally depends on the nature of what you're building and what your business model is driven by.
Next question. Right here in front.
What does early stage mean for you?
Early stage, that's a great question.
The earliest.
What's the earliest stage you're looking for? Earliest.
The earliest stage. We have invested in companies so early that it was just 1 or 2 people who were very, very smart and very capable, who had a great idea and what we believe to be the very clear wherewithal to execute on a particular opportunity against that idea. I'm trying to think of a good example. Have any of you heard of the company Placed? Yeah. So Placed is a company here in Seattle led by a phenomenal CEO by the name of David Shin, who had worked, in fact, in the past with a number of companies, or in another of companies that we had invested in. Brilliant guy, super smart. I think we did a note in very early seed stage of that company when it was just him physically incubated at Madrona, just hacking away.
Sure.
And that was a very, very early stage bet on a market opportunity, on a vision for a product, but most importantly on a person, maybe 1 or 2 people. Classically, to your question, what is early stage? For us, the sweet spot is seed or Series A. So the definitions for those rounds are, there's broad ranges, and in fact, they're getting higher in terms of total raise size, especially over the past year or 2. But if you look at sort of the classic seed or Series A round, that's right where our sweet spot is. And again, we are very good about following on. Lots of investors want to continue participating as the company raises more capital in order to preserve an ownership stake in the company. We have a very strong track record of continuing to follow on as the company grows in each round. That's not always the case with the venture firms that you might work with. We are that way. That being said, there are times that we do make initial investments in later stage companies, Series B, in really rare instances, even Series C. Not really in the sweet spot for us, not really part of what our general focus is, but it happens. And when we invest, we believe a lot in the opportunity, and we follow on. And that's been something that has been great to experience, because you get to see the evolution of that company over time as a very active partner to the entrepreneur.
Yeah, interesting to see what the data says, like how many follow on investments you guys have made after the initial round. You guys always seem like you're always in the second round.
Yeah, we've got a very strong track record with that. I don't know the numbers, but they're high.
All the way back, blue shirt.
Yeah, do you have any words of advice on raising the right amount of
the question is, some advice on raising the right amount of capital. Is it too much or is it too little? That's a tough one.
So, one of the best pieces of advice that I can give is to work backwards to that number. So think about what is it that you want to accomplish in the next 18 months, say, or however long it takes to achieve what you feel is a very meaningful milestone for your company. And then think, okay, what do I need to do to get there? Who do I need to hire? What do I need to invest in from a G&A standpoint? What do I need to spend from a marketing standpoint? What are the costs to, say, working capital, if you have working capital in your business? What are the costs there? And what will I need to achieve some particular goal at the end of that 18 to 24 months? Is that goal a product that is out there that has a growth rate of X? Is it, gosh, we're just going to get our first prototype done because we're a hardware business and we really got to prove that the technology works? Figure out what the milestone is, and then think about who you have to hire, what you have to spend, whether it be G&A, marketing, whatever it is, to get to where you want to go. And then think, okay, how much should I be raising now to achieve that? It is at a reasonable amount, given what I see as is a norm for fundraisers at a company at my stage. If the answer is, I need to raise $100 million, more often than not, that's probably not the right kind of math. But the fact of the matter is, if you're driven by the numbers and the elements that you see as the entrepreneur as being required to achieve a particular goal, and you're clear with the investor about what that goal is, one, you can have a very productive conversation around, hey, is this reasonable? Two, you can have a discussion around, is this the right goal to be setting? And three, you have a way to demonstrate that you are being very thoughtful about how you want to grow this business at minimum in the near term.
Next 5 years, what kind of technology do you want to invest?
In the next 5 years, what kind of technology you want to invest in?
Ooh, that's a big question.
5 years. 2 years.
I would love to see more e-commerce come out of Seattle. We have so much DNA here. It is crazy if you think about it. There's the obvious suspects, a la Amazon, etc. But you've got Starbucks and Costco and Expedia, and you've got all these new large companies like Zulily. And so, it's unbelievable that you don't see just a ton of smart, social-driven commerce, unique e-commerce models coming out and exploding, given the sheer talent that we have here.
Yeah.
Acquisition standpoint might be a way around that, and I think that's a theme that you've seen with e-com companies coming out of here and elsewhere that have been successful in the age of Amazon. Would love to see more of that. We've certainly got a handful of e-commerce companies too.
Yeah.
Indochino is one, by the way. If you want to buy a custom-fitted suit, very smart about fitting you and finding. You want to find very stylish attire men.
That's cool.
Indochino is the way to go.
Yeah. They're in the white shirt.
What are your thoughts on Bitcoin and blockchain-based technology?
So the question is, what's your thoughts on Bitcoin and blockchain technology?
That is a category I've spent very little time in. I've run at a very high level, and certainly we've had discussions in the partnership about it. I think it's a very important trend. I think it's one of the most polarizing topics of discussion right now for a lot of reasons. But it's been really interesting to see the kinds of companies that are coming out and saying, I'm accepting Bitcoin now.
Yeah.
You can pay for parking with Bitcoin. It's unbelievable. So, I am excited about that trend. I'm not actively looking at it, but there are a lot of folks at my firm who can speak much more smartly than I can about why it's interesting and why we think it's one that could be right for investment in the short term.
What about the cannabis business?
We're raising a side fund for that now. It's, if it were, I think it's going to be huge.
Yeah. It'll be funny. At the very least. Okay.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, you mentioned a lot of Madrona having local interests. You could grab someone from the city or from the state and tell them these are the things we need to develop startups in the area. What would you tell them?
Great question.
Yeah, can you repeat that?
I can try. So if you were to talk to somebody at the city level or state level about opportunities for Seattle to take action to improve the success of the startup community, what would they be?
Yeah.
There are so many. I think the biggest challenge facing our community right now is the amount of talent that there is demand for. We've got an incredible community for talent, but it cannot keep pace with the demand that is coming from the fast-growing companies that are here, and that is especially the case for engineering talent. And there's two ways to think about that from sort of a high level. One, there's homegrown talent, and two, there's imported talent. And you could have a whole startup grind on homegrown talent, and have a conversation with Ed Lazowska at the University of Washington Department of Computer Science and Engineering, and talk with him about the demand for computer science degrees and the amount of spots that they have to offer students who are completely qualified, extremely talented, and wanting to fill those spots. I think they have 4x the amount of demand as they have supply of spots. But the fact is, even if computer science were taught in every single classroom at an early age, and UW was able to accommodate the demand, and all of our home-oriented institutions could create a theater of this kind of talent, we still would not be able to keep pace with the demand that there is, particularly for technical talent. So you have to be able to bring it in. I like what I'm seeing in Massachusetts in terms of what they're doing with their non-compete agreements, allowing more flexibility, more fluidity, as talented engineers want to move from state to state, from company to company. I think there's also real conversations that need to be had around the policy around issuing special H-1 visas. That threshold needs to be raised. We need to be able to import from outside the United States too. It's extremely enriching to companies, to communities. That threshold's too low right now, and it's a hindrance. So I think that there are some real policy discussions that can and hopefully will be had, and that's sort of the top of mind reaction to what kinds of conversations would be important with those kinds of people who have that kind of influence.
So what kind of due diligence do you do on a technical basis? You talked about teams and markets and stuff like that. Do you guys dig into the kind of technologies that you're using, architecture, any of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, the question is what kind of due diligence do you do on the technology side? So digging into the code and the theory behind it. How much do you guys do that? Obviously, you have to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's critical and really important. Which means the same, it's critical.
And really important. Which means it's super critical.
It's also, yeah, I'll stop. So we have on our team a number of people who have different areas of expertise and are able to contribute uniquely to any number of forms of technical diligence. We've got a couple of venture partners at Madrona who are Interestingly enough, both have ties to the University of Washington. Dan Wells, who's a professor in the Computer Science and Engineering Department, Oren Etzioni, who I think he's either there currently or maintains a position there, but he's currently the head of the Allen Institute of Artificial Intelligence. Extremely smart guy too, also has founded a number of companies that we've invested in as well. Those are two of the resources that we use. I think one of the critical forms of value that you can extract from a venture firm is the network that you get access to. So for us, having a competency in developing a strong technical network is important for us, both for what we offer our companies as well as how we understand opportunities. So we have a number of entrepreneurs, a number of computer scientists, a number of very smart, technical-minded folks who we reach out to pretty regularly to help diligence what we, for those of us that aren't, computer scientists or engineers, or data scientists, what we aren't able to do for ourselves, for our own deals that we lead.
Okay.